Welcome into the Action Network podcast. We are presented by the FanDuel Sportsbook, your NFL draft betting update 1 week away from the 2023 draft. Brendan Glasheen, your host, joined by our draft analysts, experts, Luke Swain, Vegas Refund, and Travis Reed. We're joining you every week. We've got a lot to reveal in terms of what we have coming up on the pod. That will come later. But we're gearing up, fellas. We're getting close. We're a week away from the draft. We're joining you midweek, recording on a Wednesday, leading you up to the draft, which starts April 27th. Lead story. It's been now for the last couple weeks, the odds movement for number one pick, first quarterback to go. Bryce Young is minus 1,200 at FanDuel to go number one. A week ago when we were doing this podcast, he was at minus 300. Things have changed. Bryce has ended his visits. We'll dive into CJ Stroud. Will Levis is gaining steam. Luke, as far as where we're at now from when we were a week ago, what jumps out to you from an odds movement perspective?
It's the nothing. I think it can be assumed that Bryce is the number one pick at this point. Crazier things have happened in terms of like Paolo, I guess you could say, from NBA, but really I'm kind of the number one pick. I'm kind of just assuming it's Bryce, where it really gets crazy with what's going on with the number two pick now, where there's 100 different scenarios that it could go. And based on whichever scenario happens, which we just got added an additional scenario with Trey Lance, the entire top 10 can be completely different depending on who goes to. The only certainty, I think, not a certainty, but what I feel strongest about is probably that CJ Stroud isn't going number two right now, where it might be a D-line, a trade, or Levis. But also that can change by the time we're ending recording here. So as of this exact moment, that is my only lean on that pick. But number one pick kind of feels like it's wrapped up at this point, and we're just moving on to the rest.
Travis, you have a take on what the Trey Lance report today from Rappaport means. We'll get to that, but reaction to where we're at in terms of the number one pick market, Bryce Young, the favorite, and we'll dive into the intricacies of Stroud and Levis. But your latest developing opinions, Travis Reed, on what's happening here since we last talked.
Yeah, obviously not great for the portfolio. That if Bryce does go number one, we were all kind of rooting for anyone but him, but you just kind of live with that. I think the biggest update is, the hinge point of the draft. We always thought that was going to be 3 with Arizona. Would they trade down? Would they just take Will Anderson? And now it seems like Houston is not set on taking a quarterback at 2, so that hinge point has moved up a spot. So now that's really where the draft begins. Do they take a quarterback? Do they trade for a quarterback? Do they take a defensive player? Do they trade down? There's a ton of different options there. And something hopefully we'll learn in the next week, that what Houston's plans are, and that'll kind of let us set the rest of the top 10 and really the draft from there on out.
We've been documenting a timeline of quarterback visits, and more so at this point, Stroud and Levis, because as we said up the top, that Bryce Young has now ended his visit. So for CJ Stroud, 5 days ago, met with the Colts. Last couple days, Panthers, Falcons. But again, it feels the Panthers they're just doing their due diligence, with Young likely going one there. Levis visited last Friday with Atlanta, and then early this week, Colts, and then Panthers. So Panthers last-minute visit for Levis, the last-minute visit for Stroud happening today, Wednesday, with the Atlanta Falcons.
I have heard that he has not done well on them at all.
Hasn't done well with his visit with the Falcons.
No, other teams. Well, Falcons happen now. I've heard that his meetings with some teams in the top 5 have been pretty bad. And that can be taken for whatever it's worth, and who knows, could be completely wrong, but that's all.
It would explain this kind of overall feeling that Stroud is falling, because all the tape is there, all the, you look at the games against like Georgia and things like that, you're like, wow, he looks really good. So why is he falling? That would explain, the things behind closed doors that we're not seeing, where he's not doing well. That would explain the overall sentiment on him being down.
Yeah, and like there's when we discuss like which we're gonna get into later, like when players are like rising and falling, there's
Yeah.
like two types where like there's players rising and falling because we in the media were just wrong on them. Like it's not like these teams of all this had all of a sudden are like, oh, player X, he just played yesterday. He looked great. Like it's not like all of a sudden these guys are jumping up draft boards because teams are realizing something. It's really just us having these players propped up or too low and last second realizing that they're better than what everyone's been the perception has. And then there's guys like Stroud who are actually there's things that are happening that could be making them fall where we might have been right and he's just blowing it. So it can be taken two ways.
Jim Irsay's having fun with the people on Twitter, and that's worth bringing up because the Colts hold the number 4 pick, and they are the favorite. Well, the pick favorite at 4 is now Will Levis at plus 150, as you both highlighted. Will Houston go defense? Will the Cardinals stay put at 3 and go defense? Will Anderson the favorite to go 2 and to go 3 at FanDuel? Anderson, Stroud, co-favorites at 3, both at plus 250. But to bring in the Will Levis component and why Stroud has fell, Luke, what, from a betting perspective, how do you wrap your head around of course, the reporting, but now with the market shifting where Levis has now emerged as a legit threat to Stroud going ahead of him?
So really like the Levis odds, I want to say last week or 2 weeks ago, like they're 20-1. And I think they're all the way down to like plus 300 or he's the second favorite for number 2. He's the favorite for number 4, where at this point, like, I don't think we have any type of certainty where that would make Levis like a value play. But at the same time, like if you do believe it and you do get info, Levis plus 200 or 300 today could very well become Levis minus 200 tomorrow, which would make that all of a sudden value. But I think right now, based off of the odds with Levis, it's really not worth it. I still think, like I would say D-line is the favorite, and then Levis close behind, where like I do a mock draft like I've mentioned every night, and the last 2 nights I've put Levis at number 2. So I think it's possible. This whole Trey Lance trade idea kind of, to me, I don't want to like buy into these things happen, but we were talking on Slack earlier. Is like, is it worth bringing up? And then I said no. And then since then, I feel like it's starting to get legs, where this whole trade scenario with Houston kind of confirms the fact that they might be taking a quarterback at number 2. So if the trade doesn't happen, maybe they take Levis. The trade happens, then they'll probably go someone like Anderson or Tyree, where Anderson's plus 200, Levis is, I think, like plus 250.
Travis, why don't you take this time now to weigh in on this particular market? And we're going to get into the defensive line angle next, because that is where it feels like Houston's going with DeMeco Ryans, defensive-minded coach. Not going to go quarterback, possibly defense, D-line. We'll dive into that aspect, but you've got thoughts here on this Trey Lance report, which I can read for you. This is from Ian Rappaport. The Niners have received inquiries from several teams. There's that several teams line again. Schefter had that with the Cardinals too. Several teams in on a potential trade for former number 3 overall pick Trey Lance. The conversations have been the result of San Francisco fielding the calls. They're not making them. Teams aware. This last part to me is wow. It's alarming. Just from they're kind of done with Trey Lance. According to this, teams are aware that Brock Purdy is likely the future starter, and he's already hurt. So who knows his future? But Travis, you do think this has an impact on what we could see at the top of the draft?
Yeah, and I think it makes more sense, maybe not for the top of the draft, but those teams that were looking to trade in, like instead of like Tennessee having to trade a haul of picks to move up into that top 5 to make, to get a quarterback that they want, they can probably trade a day 2 pick to get a Trey Lance, who's only 22. I mean, this Hendon Hooker thing at 25 coming off an ACL, you can get a guy who's 3 years younger, with the 2nd or 3rd round pick. So I think I think Trey Lance has to be in play for some of these teams that are looking for a quarterback, especially if they're not in love with a Stroud because of his bad meetings. If they don't think Anthony Richardson is ready, but their roster is pretty good to contend right now. He's kind of still a mystery box. We haven't seen Trey Lance play a ton of games, but he's going to cost less than some of these other quarterbacks that are also mystery boxes. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It'd be really funny if the Raiders just had Jimmy G and Lance again on the same team. I don't see him doing that, but that would be the most hilarious outcome. But yeah, one of these teams that doesn't have a long-term answer, if they want to take a shot on Lance, it makes all the sense in the world.
Feels like the Colts too, bringing the Colts back into this. They've been connected to Trey Lance in some fascinating ways, leading up to when he was drafted by San Francisco. But the Colts were interested in Trey Lance a couple years ago. So that's a factor too.
And I don't know if this is like an angle that's just overplayed by everyone, but like all of the trade scenarios that make the most sense with Houston are in division. So like Titans and Colts are the ones that make probably the most sense from everything that we hear.
Great point.
But like then you have the whole teams don't want to trade in division, which I think Jeremiah had a tweet where the potential trade partners that Houston could have or the potential quarterbacks that they might pass on, their in-division rivals could be very likely to have them, which could be like a whole backfiring aspect in itself.
So at number 2, the Texans, based on this market adjustment, market movement, whatever you want to call it, since we last chatted with the people a week ago, the Texans are now probably going defense. Now, Will Anderson's the favorite to go number 2. Not by much, plus 200, as you both have highlighted. Stroud plus 250, Levis plus 250. Tyree Wilson, his name is at plus 400, so he's moved up the board here. Luke, you have a pick you want to weave into this as well. What the Texans might do at 2, and you sort of adhered to it a bit. It gets complicated because say someone does want to move up, do the Texans really have interest in trading in the division to give Tennessee or to give Indianapolis a leg up on their future at quarterback? So your overall thoughts on what you have a pick in the middle of this here too.
Yeah. So I'll have 2 picks. I'll give one out now and then I'll give one out at the end of the show. But I think one is worth a stab. Actually doesn't have to do with the pick, but Tyree Wilson, first defensive player taken. I think he's going to be like plus 300 right now. Is definitely worth a bet. Zierlein has been a common theme of any podcast you listen to, because honestly, he's been great replying to a ton of tweets, but everything that you hear, like the Texans could go D-line and the Cardinals could go D-line,
right?
Where Zierlein had Tyree ahead of Anderson in his mock a couple weeks ago. And then you also are seeing some things about Anderson's measurables, or like his quote unquote bend isn't what teams, where the upside of Tyree is a lot higher. And Tyree feels like someone that is on the rise, that is very much in that range that you could see going in at like plus 300, which it's honestly not terrible value. It's never gotten like crazy high. I think the highest it ever got was like plus 500 or something, but it does feel like Anderson's stock, even though it should be the favorite, is somewhat coming down, where everything that we're seeing is kind of leveraging Tyree to go 2 or 3, which I prefer first defensive player odds, because if a QB goes 2, I think Tyree's very much in play for the Cardinals over Anderson. But at the same time, we got Zierlein pumping Tyree up, where the most interesting part about how Zierlein has talked about comparing Anderson and Tyree, I forget if it was on a podcast or it was a tweet reply, but he was speaking to Tyree having a good chance to go ahead of Anderson. But at the same time, Zierlein is someone that values his rankings a lot, and he has Anderson ranked ahead of Tyree in his like big board, which speaks to like that's what he thinks teams are going to be doing. Which the fact that he's like admitting to Tyree going ahead of Anderson, even though he has Anderson ranked ahead, just tells me like teams could be higher on Tyree. So plus 300, definitely worth a bet.
That makes sense too, because as you mapped out, if indeed they do make a deal, meaning the Texans, and trade out of 2, that still gives you wiggle room for the Cardinals to select. And now looking back on it, that Zierlein mock draft from early April isn't all as drunk as we thought, huh? Young 1, correct. Tyree Wilson 2, Anderson 3. Now, if Stroud goes to the Ravens, I have not, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think CJ Stroud has met with the Ravens in a visit, right? Has that happened?
His visits are definitely picking up, which speaks to like
True.
it seems like a last ditch effort. So I don't think the Ravens have met with him. I think the Ravens have met with I don't know, but
Richardson. They've met with Richardson. I'm pretty sure but they have not met with CJ Stroud. But the top three is looking kind of enticing now. But now if there's no deals, of course, no trades, and they just go 1, 2, 3 quarterback, 2 defensive players, and that could set up the Levis smoke, which that's what Zierlein did not have in his projection earlier on. Travis, you've
Schrager
got
did.
Schrager did. We'll get to Schrager's latest mock because the quarterback thing, the idea of maybe more than 4 quarterbacks going in the first round now has some steam thanks to Schrager's latest. Travis, your latest thoughts here on if you have a pick, please fire away. But number 2 pick, Texans, Cardinals, defensive player, how it all works its way back to the Levis stuff too.
Yeah, I think it's tempting to try to take shots on who's the number 2 pick going to be, who's the number 3 pick going to be, who's the number 4 pick going to be. But I think Luke played it the right way and just selecting, okay, who's the first out of the groupings, because it's still a mess because we don't know if those trades are going to come in or not. So we don't know if a QB is going at 2. The way we've been talking about it sounds kind of messy all through that 2 through 5 range. It's because it is. So it's kind of tough to predict exactly like slotting in a player at each spot, but you can kind of say, okay, I think this guy's going ahead of this guy. That's where you want to make your bets right now, rather than just try to actually nail the 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe by next week, we'll have a better idea of, okay, now we think we can actually hit all those. But I think there's just too many moving parts. Too many quarterbacks that have to kind of fall off the carousel before we can start to say, all right, I'm plugging this guy at 2, plugging in this guy at 3. So you're better off, I think, taking bets on, first defensive player. If they have a second quarterback market, you want to take your bet there rather than plugging them in at 2, 3, 4, or wherever he may be in the top 5.
Yep.
Okay. What's our latest feeling on the Cardinals? Has anything changed? We don't really know. I mean, that Schefter report, they were like the talk of the draft because everyone felt it was like, okay, it's going to be either Stroud or Young. And at that time, of course, we didn't know. It was kind of going back and forth. Stroud was the favorite. Then, of course, everything flipped. But now I feel like the Cardinals are on the back burner of the news cycle, Luke.
So it always feels like when trades are talked about the most, they never happen. And then when they're not talked about, everything goes off the rails, where like the Cardinals trading out of 3 has been one of the strongest storylines from day one, where I think multiple quote unquote experts have like deemed them a 99% chance of trading out. But as like within the last week, and it really has to do with whether the Texans are going to take a quarterback or not, it does feel like it has become less likely where the Cardinals might just be stuck, where you hear about these quarterbacks potentially falling with the value of number 3 not being what it was perceived weeks ago. Where if the Cardinals are stuck, like you would assume it's either one of Anderson and Tyree. But it really hinges on if Stroud's there. If Stroud's there, he's not there. Someone wants to trade up for someone like AR. Like it is chaos, but it does feel like it's become less likely than what's been perceived this entire time. And they might get stuck based on whatever the Texans do.
Mm-hmm. Travis, is it just simple for Arizona to take the best man on the board? So if it's not Wilson, they settle with Will Anderson, or do they just take the best available player? What do you think Arizona's doing at this point with no real news in the last week or so?
Yeah, I think they still want to trade down. I think Schrager mentioned in his mock, they want to get out of that pick, but if the whole market is down on the quarterback position relative to what we thought a couple of weeks ago, their pick's just not as valuable as we thought it was. So if nobody is itching to move up to number 3, they're just going to have to take that best player available. I think that's got to be one of the edge rushers. They could go corner if they really, really liked one of the top 2 guys, but I'd be pretty surprised if they don't trade the pick, if they don't take one of those top 2 edge rushers.
And the market reflects that. Number 3 pick over at FanDuel, Anderson, Stroud, Richardson, all at plus 250. So there's no play there based on what we've discussed.
Yeah.
Okay, Now this I'm looking forward to, the Peter Schrager mock draft. I always like when we come on here. This is what, our 4th, 5th episode now, doing these betting updates, these NFL draft betting updates, and we don't always get a fresh mock, but fresh off the press, Peter Schrager as of yesterday morning, latest mock. He's got Bryce Young 1. He's got Stroud going 2. Cardinals take Anderson, and he echoes exactly what you both talked about as far as if there's nothing there, take the best available smart, safe pick in Will Anderson. Wilson goes to 4. I haven't said Will Levis's name yet, but we'll skip on down. And you guys, of course, can tell him if there's anything else you'd like to fill in the blanks here on the Schrager mock. But there's Hendon Hooker, number 11 overall to the Tennessee Titans. And this goes back to the market of over-under quarterbacks taken in the first round at 4.5. There was significant juice on taking the under 4.5. And now it's kind of shrinking where it could possibly go either way with this Hendon Hooker stock rising. Over 4.5 is at -102, under 4.5, -130. And of course, there's some Cardinals tie-ins in there as well. Some Arizona Cardinals tie-ins as well there. You're not Will Levis, you're Luke Swain. Luke, do you have thoughts on this mock? And by the way, Levis going 12 to Houston. So he's got Hooker at 11, Levis at 12.
So overall, I thought it was less crazy than I think everyone made it out to be outside of the quarterbacks, where like everything else like was just kind of against the grain, but it made sense. And Schrager is one of the more connected guys in terms of the mock drafts. He is a very good schmoozer from everything that I heard. Like he wines and dines guys. Have confirmed that his connect at the Cardinals is still there. But the thing with Hendon Hooker is, and I just refuse to bet the over, but I'm also too scared to bet the under, or excuse me. Yeah. Under. And the thing you want to look out for over the next week as mock drafts come out, and it definitely feels like Hendon Hooker has a ton of momentum. But if we start seeing mock drafts that are putting Hendon Hooker to the same team, for me, that means something. Where these mock drafts, these guys like the key guys like the Jeremiahs, the Schragers, the Brewlers, they put him to the same team in all of their mocks. That tells me like something is known. But if we just have guys putting Hooker in the first round to a different team on every mock, basically because they think he's worthy of a first round pick, that's when I don't totally buy it. And that's just kind of like something that maybe it's like a copycat mock draft product. But Hooker at 11 would be nuts. But at the same time, and another thing you want to note with these mock drafts is like they want to the mock ratings are becoming popular after, and they want to get it right. And player to team, like if you predict a specific player to a team, no matter what the pick is, you get X amount of points. So you will see mock drafts that are putting specific player, like where Levis to the Texans, like you hear
Plus
that
200.
you hear that the Texans love Levis, which everyone's implying number 2. But the fact that Schrager put him at 11, 12 was it? Yeah,
12. Hooker 11, and then Levis 12.
Yeah.
And then Anthony
Schrager,
Richardson to Seattle at the top of the draft.
Schrager putting him to the Texans just in general kind of confirms everything that we've been hearing, that they're high on him, whether it's at, and then we just got to figure out if it's possible at 2 or not. But that was the other thing I got out of it. And then he had to the Cardinals, he had Trey, which that is first thing you should look at is who he puts to the Cardinals, which
and that reflects your confidence in Wilson. Never mind what team he goes to, but first defensive player off the board.
Yeah, which Anderson went first in his mock for what it's worth, but
never mind then. But
which if he had put a QB first, but basically who knows? But he had a kid, so he hasn't done a lot of mock drafts, and he's back in it, and he still has one more to go, and he is notorious for his second to last mock draft being crazy because he kind of created the idea of leveraging reactions from everyone. The crazier it is, the more reactions you get from people that he respects, and he kind of uses them to make his final mock draft as accurate as possible.
So this is the mock before the mock.
Correct.
All right. Very good. Travis, thoughts on this latest mock that we've looked at different mocks over the course of the podcast and these draft betting updates from Peter Schrager. Anything jump out to you?
I mean, the Hendon Hooker thing, I still just don't understand, at all. I just don't get it, but it's one of those things we talked about in one of the early episodes. It's not what you think, it's predicting what the NFL teams think. Yeah. So I guess he's in the first round conversation. So I'm kind of in the same boat as Luke. I'm not going to take the over or the under, the 4.5 there. I thought Quentin Johnson falling to 32 was interesting because we have seen some other reports that teams aren't as high as him, and really just the wide receiver market in general was kind of overrated by the media, especially at the beginning of this whole process. And maybe there's not as many receivers going to go in the first round as we originally thought. And that kind of backed that up a little bit. So that was one thing that did catch my eye, is this whole receiver thing. Still hoping JSN goes first and he has that. But maybe, that back end of the draft, there's maybe only 2 or 3 other guys that go. So that was one other thing that caught my eye about Schrager's mock.
And trying to connect some dots to Schrager's mock from Schrager's Schrager's mock to the market. Team to draft Hendon Hooker, Tennessee's at 10-1. And they are the same odds as the Patriots, same as the Buccaneers. The Vikings are the favorite to land them. So,
and there's no way. And I didn't see what those odds were prior to his mock coming out, but
okay,
those odds definitely got crushed by anyone reading it, just wanting it, because Hendon Hooker's odds are high everywhere because they really don't have an idea. And just to pivot off of what Travis said about Quentin Johnson, that is one of the markets that I had interest in a couple of days ago, because you hear him falling, which I bet is over when it came out on Caesars, and you hear him falling and maybe not even making it into the first, where Schrager, I think this happened last year and I forget who it was, but you see a player working out with Mahomes and all of a sudden everyone starts tweeting it, and all of a sudden the Chiefs become the favorite to take this guy just because he's catching passes in practice. But you see Quentin falling maybe out of the first, which Quentin Johnson team odds are high everywhere. No one has any idea, and they've been up forever. And targeting a team in the early second round, there are some really juicy ones, where teams like that are the trendy wide receiver teams in the first round. We have Texans,
Giants, Vikings,
Texans, Chargers, Ravens, Vikings, Giants. Yeah. I mean, and Cardinals, even the Cardinals, which the one that caught my eye the most was Cardinals to get Quentin, which at the time, a week or two ago, was 25-1, where that could be anyone's game, could be anyone trading up. So if you think he's a great fit, or you think someone in the early second round, or even the Chiefs, I guess, could target Quentin, there are definitely some long shots in those.
I see your point. You're talking early second round now, in case he does fall there, right? So that would
because his odds have been priced out as if he's going in the first, which the teams in the early second.
Got it.
The favorites are the back end first round. And if he doesn't even go there and he falls to the early second, then you got teams in the early first that haven't been priced into Quentin that have the opportunity to get him or trade up, that are in the 20s.
Got it.
20s-1.
Makes sense. Right, because in Minnesota and the Giants, those teams, I said those teams because that would reflect bottom third of the first round, and the market at FanDuel, I'm looking at it now, it reflects that. Minnesota plus 500, Giants 10-1, Ravens in the middle, sandwiched in between. They pick at 22 plus 600. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah, it gets interesting because the Rams are at 36 and they're 10-1, Texans, and so on and so forth. To echo your point. Okay, very good. So Peter Schrager, latest mock draft, you can find that at NFL.com. If just as a reference point, when you listen to the podcast, that's what we're looking at. Came out on April 18th. Let's go to our friend Lance Zierlein. It's like the Zierlein minute. We've got to come up with something because we always bring up Zierlein on the pod. And you've mentioned this in previous episodes, Luke, that you're just blown away. I just smacked my table and now my camera went flying. you're blown away by the way he replies to people on social media, and he gives legitimate info. And it could just be like one word, like example. Someone asked him about Bijan Robinson, the running back, if Dallas has any chance of landing him. Of course, Dallas moved on from Zeke Elliott, yada, yada. Jerry Jones would love himself a star out of Texas, right? And he just drops an unlikely. Like, that's worthwhile information. But there's got to be some other things that jump out to you, and just his approach to it in general about how to use that info to maybe bet and look at stuff.
Yeah, and he'll just give like a straight no. Like, is
right.
The player X going to go ahead of player Y? And he just goes no. But like, it's better that it's like, that's info. That's great. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think you want to take those like straight up no's in the terms of like the context that some might perceive it as like 0% chance. I think he's just like firing off tweets. Mm-hmm. But like, it's great because people in his like role that everyone looks to for mock drafts and his expertise, like, don't reply to the majority of the replies he gets on his stuff. And there are some diamonds in the rough, 100%. He has, like, there was one a couple, like last week, I want to say, where you had to like connect, and you have to connect a few replies where he was kind of going into, he was saying it was going off of Bryce going 1, but then he said that there's 0% chance that Levis goes ahead of Stroud. But then then he replied to another one saying one of the quarterbacks of the top 4 falls out of the top 10, which if you connect those dots, that means Bryce is going 1. If Stroud is ahead of Levis for him, then Stroud would be the second quarterback. But the fact that he's comparing it to Levis means that the quarterback falling out of the top 10 would be Richardson, in his opinion. So like, that would be like the dot connecting. And it should be taken that like, he is the best connection we have to the Texans, but at the same time, right, he can't, like, you just have, like, you have to take what he says for what it is. At the same time, don't just automatically be like firing off bets based off of every reply he has. Like, we don't know the level. We have like a new front office there, or not a new front office. We have a new head coach. We don't know the level of sources he has relative to previous years. And we don't know if this is just his opinion, because he definitely has a strong opinion on a lot of guys. So definitely look in his replies, but at the same time, make sure you're not overreacting, because there are a lot of replies.
Lots of them. Travis, do you sink your teeth? See, like, that's a tool for like Twitter. Elon, if you're listening, I'll take credit for this. Like, there should be a favorite like button, and then there should be like, well, I guess that's a bookmark. That's new. So I guess I give Elon credit there. That's what the bookmark would be for. You got to bookmark some of these and then throw them into the blender, and then it spits out what you think is going to happen. So I guess I take it back. It's not innovative. Elon, you've already done this. It's the bookmark is now the new like for this kind of thing.
Bookmark's been around for a while.
Yeah.
Has it really?
Yeah, it might be pre-Elon, actually. So
shit, I didn't know that. I started seeing bookmark up, and I'm like,
it was kind of the option was buried. He made it more visible for sure.
Okay. Anyway, okay, fine, fair enough. Travis, anything you read into Zierlein at all? Have already any update? Like, again, the Bijan Robinson just responds to a tweeter. Unlikely, one word, in and out. That's it.
Yeah, it's great information. I think Luke already hit on that. It's pretty cool. There's, like you said, there's nobody else that does that. Imagine if you could just go into Schefter and just like, hey, ask him anything about the league, and he just told you straight up yes or no. How awesome that would be. Like, that would just, and that's kind of what we have. Again, it's not gospel, like Luke said, but there's a lot of information you can wean out of those tweets. So if you're listening to this, we talked, like, I think I was on the very first episode, there's answers out there. That's a good place to go get some. You can at least get one guy who's plugged into the league, and he'll give you some answers of what he thinks is going to happen in the draft. And that's super valuable.
I mean, I go through their likes too. Like, I go through Jeremiah's likes on a nightly basis.
But see,
you're straight up stalking some people. I love it.
Have to. It's TMZ time.
You guys had some thoughts on the Falcons at number 8. As I said earlier, the Falcons are welcoming in CJ Stroud for a visit today. And they have met with Levis as well, but it feels like if they're going to Stroud, Is that, I guess the order of visits too, I always find kind of fascinating. Does that mean like their previous visit, they're like, all right, we're just doing due diligence, or like, actually, we actually think we have a chance at this guy. So it changes your approach. So CJ Stroud, as of Wednesday, April 19th, in the building for the Cardinals. Luke, you've got thoughts on what the Atlanta might be doing at 8.
Yeah, the late visits are very telling, specifically with Stroud, whether it's a last-ditch effort for himself because he thinks he might fall, or teams thinking he might fall to them, or maybe implying that he might not go where they thought and he could trade up. But there's a couple trendy picks. Bijan has been one of the more trendy picks to the Falcons at 8, which I just can't get behind totally, at least at his current odds, because I think he is the favorite.
Yes, he is. Plus 250 at FanDuel to the team to draft Bijan Robinson, Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and I think the Raiders and Falcons are live if a quarterback falls for a team to trade up, whether it's like a team like the Titans or maybe even the Texans if they go D-line and they don't do a trade with like for Trey Lance, let's say. But Nolan Smith is the one that's trending for the Falcons, which I think that is a hot trade spot because Nolan Smith is a guy that they very likely would get if they traded with like the Titans, let's say. If they just swap picks and Titans traded up to get someone like one of the quarterbacks that's falling, the Falcons could very well get Nolan Smith at 12 or 11 or 12 at the same time. But the names you hear: Nolan Smith, Lucas Van Ness, and then Bijan, and I think O-line is somewhat of a dark horse as well, which I don't think Schrager put O-line there. No, he put O-line to the Raiders, which is a dark horse too. But Nolan is definitely the pick for the Falcons, trending very hard, whether it's at 8 or like 11 or 12, which I think makes a total sense.
Travis, thoughts on the Falcons, what they might be doing? Is they've got Stroud in for a visit today, but any other position that you might find actionable or something that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I agree. I still wouldn't rule out Jalen Carter falling there. Although it looks like in the last week, maybe teams have kind of gotten over some of the bumps and bruises that he had early in the process. I do find it weird that like when Lamar became available, Atlanta just straight out came out, oh, we're not interested. We're going with Ritter. But now that, okay, Stroud might fall to them, they're going to take some meetings and things like that. That's kind of an interesting double-sided. Like, why would you not be interested in Lamar to upgrade your quarterback, but you are interested in drafting one of these guys? But I do think you want to take as many of these meetings as you can, find out, everything you can about these young quarterbacks and see what you want to do. But I would agree that defense is probably the most likely pick here still for Atlanta.
It's always fun when, and by the way, the latest on Jalen Carter, good call to bring him up. And I'm on his Twitter page right now. It's not Zierlein, it's Adam Schefter. Georgia defensive tackle Jalen Carter visiting the Falcons today, which was yesterday. We're recording on April 19th. This occurred on Tuesday. Jalen Carter visited the Falcons Tuesday. So he's now visited with every team picking between 5 and 10. Seattle, Detroit, Vegas, Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia. So I want to bring up something Luke said, and I laugh because it's like kind of right on point, but now I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. Adam Schefter, since we started recording, Boston College wide receiver Zay Flowers, Mel Kiper's number 10 overall prospect. Schefter throwing a bone to his colleague. He's in Texas today to work out with Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes at the request of the team, per source. This is exactly what you laid out. Flowers believed his pre-draft process was over after visiting with the Titans on Tuesday until the Chiefs called and asked him to meet up today with Mahomes. That almost feels made up based on or you almost knew something like this was coming.
I didn't even see that. And I didn't know that. I was just seeing it, which I don't think Zay would make it to 31. So you would assume. So, I mean, that would be like Chiefs would have to trade up for Zay, I think. That's hilarious.
So you don't think there's anything to it because you don't think he'll be there unless Kansas City trades up.
Right. I think the only way they get Zay is if they trade up for him.
Okay. I just couldn't. I mean, that's
amazing. That's amazing.
You literally said Mahomes too. You could have said anyone else, but I had to read it. I read it 3 times while Travis was talking to make sure. Okay, this is legit, right? Wow. All right. We'll wrap with this. Any final bets you guys want to get out there before next week? And I've got a lot to tell people about for next week because we have a lot more coming besides just this weekly episode. But anything picks wise we want to give out before we go?
So I got one. I'm gonna give out. So I'm gonna get Bills first position drafted offensive line. Or excuse me. Wait. Bills first position drafted defensive line should be around plus 500. 450, that's fine, but plus 500. The reasoning for this is I've harped on it a couple times, but in this draft that it has a weaker class, it is easy to predict position in the picks top 5, top 10, because we know who the best players are. But in a weak draft, there is a drop off in talent. And I've spoken to when we get towards the end of the draft, I think teams are going to go for need a lot more than best player available because there really just isn't a clear best player available relative to other drafts. And when we look at the Bills right now, we have linebacker and wide receiver currently favored, which linebacker is a trendy pick and that is a need, but that is not a premium position. And I don't think linebacker should be the favorite position for any team with any odds. Where wide receiver, we have 4 potential first round wide receivers. We have JSN, Zay, Addison, Quentin. Quentin might be falling out of the first. And then those 3 might not even be there. We have about 4 or 5 teams trendy for the wide receiver position. So then we get to the Bills and their 4 defensive linemen are on the last year of their contracts. And then you have Ed Oliver, who might even get traded. There are rumors about. So it might not be a specific need today, but next year, defensive line is going to be a glaring need. And when you get to the end of the first round, all the offensive linemen might be gone, which is another need.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at the defensive line, we got guys like Mozzie Smith, who would be a perfect fit, Keon White, McDonald, a couple guys I can't pronounce their names, but the crop of defensive linemen that are worthy of going in the first round far outweighs offensive linemen to me, which I almost gave out O-line and D-line because I think they both should be the favorite at this point. But at plus 500, like it is one of the few great value bets I think exists in a spot in the draft that anything could happen. That almost, I feel like every position for a team that has had a ton of success, that doesn't have any like huge needs, shouldn't have a favorite. I think they all should be pretty much equal. So Bills defensive line plus 500.
Travis, any picks before we go?
Yeah, I like the defensive back market, which includes both corners and safeties. It's over 5.5, minus 114 at FanDuel. There's 6 guys right now that I think are solidly in the first, and there's so you got Gonzalez and Witherspoon, the 2 top corners. Porter, Banks, Forbes has been screaming up boards. He's looking like a pretty sure first rounder. You also have Branch, the safety from Alabama. You kind of have some wild cards with Ringo and Cam Smith from the SEC as corners that are supposed to go like early second, could sneak in. So I think over 5.5 defensive backs in the first round at FanDuel is a good pick.
Good bet. And I do want to mention with Branch, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the majority of sports books are grading Branch as a corner. So if you are betting like team position, make sure it's defensive back and not corner. Because if you look, FanDuel says position based off the combine, and the NFL.com lists Branch as a cornerback, which every mock, everything you see, I was even assuming it. Branch is not a safety for grading purposes, which is crazy.
Right. And you've got 5.5 defensive backs, both at over under, both at minus 114. You said you like the over.
Over, yeah. I think there's at least 6, and I think there's a chance you see some of those guys. You might even get 7.
All right, very good. And I just want to update everybody too. Tucker Kraft, first tight end drafted, is still 100-1. If you listened to last week's episode, so not much movement there. That's kind of.
I'll let you know if I bet it if it wins.
Okay, very good. I'll try to drive up the highway here and talk to Mr. Kraft in Foxborough to see if he's got any thoughts on that.
You can bet the draft in MA, FYI.
Yeah, I know. I've got it up right here.
Good.
So
good. Get involved.
I mean, come on. I mean, I've sunk my teeth in completely here, and I'll tell you why you can sink your teeth in even more. Because here's what we got coming up on the Action Network podcast the next couple weeks. So, first off, 2 NFL win total episodes. So we're talking now into the next season. 2 win total episodes, Stuckey and Chris Raybon. Those are going to drop on Thursday and Monday. So a win total episode coming to you this week, and then one at the start of next week. Speaking of next week, next Tuesday, that would bring us to April 25th, 2 days before the draft. We'll have a final mock draft episode with Luke Swain, who's right here, and a special guest on Wednesday, which is a week from now. 3 of us are back. We'll return for our final NFL draft best bets episode. And plan is we're going to have a special episode for day 2 of the NFL draft as well. But stay tuned. We're working on logistics. A special day 2 episode of our NFL draft betting update as the draft's taking place. Day 2 here on the Action Network podcast. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for sticking with us during that one. A lot to unpack. For Luke Swain, Travis Reed, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for listening to the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel.